Welcome to the Art of Marketing Operations, a Taylor podcast. Here you can grow your knowledge about marketing operations, listen to ideas and strategies to help you scale, grow, and optimize your efficiency, drive your speed to market, and enrich your work life. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the Art of Marketing Operations, a Taylor podcast. I'm Glenn Bottomley, and today my guest is Rich Phillips, Managing Director at Huron Consulting Group, a global professional services firm that collaborates with clients to put possible into practice by creating sound strategies, optimizing operations, and accelerating digital transformation. Thanks for joining us today, Rich.
Great to be here, Glenn. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share with you today.
Absolutely. Well, Rich, you have done a lot of work taking successful marketing strategies and technologies from lots of other industries and bringing them into healthcare, for example. So can you elaborate on why is this approach beneficial and why many health systems struggle to understand their customers, quote unquote?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with my intrinsic interest in improving the lives of patients. You know, I entered healthcare as kind of a mission and, hoping to really make a difference. I think the first big thing is the benefit to the patient is an improved experience. And, one of my clients calls that "show me, you know me," kind of a real living example of a brand treating its customers well, in this case, patients. The benefit to the health system ultimately is they develop durable relationships with their patient clients. That results in retention, better revenue over time, even better profitability, obviously. So there's just a lot of reasons why it makes sense. And, candidly, healthcare is beginning to learn that their patients are actually customers as well, and it changes the discipline. And thankfully, I've had many learnings outside of healthcare that give me an opportunity to bring that insight into healthcare and teach them things they're interested in learning, but just have not figured out how to get there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and I remember when you and I chatted before, one of the things that I know you stated was so important to marketing operations is the starting point of really good data. But my question then would be is, how do you know when your data is good? And how do you take steps to move forward to making sure that you're going to get good data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing that I learned, and I mentioned I've worked with many different organizations. One of the first things I learned was if your data is not right, then none of your goals are very possible. It's really, really difficult. So we always think about a phase zero being this boring thing called validate and clean up your data. And that can incur in parallel with other efforts underway. The second thing I would say is that your data is better the closer you go to the source. And by that, I mean, if you've got a lot of different interim steps before that data is made actionable, typically there's some dilution that occurs along the way, whether it's interpretation or integration issues or what have you. I think the last thing I'll say that's relevant there is one of my clients was Wells Fargo, and the CIO was a good friend of mine. He had 100,000 people reporting to him. He really understood the business well. And he said for them, it's all about signature moments of truth and really delivering at the points that matter. And so while you may not be able to fix your data everywhere, my view is focus on the 5 to 7 points in the journey that really make a difference. Your customers or patients will tell you what those are. Make sure the data is right there. And generally, if you do that, everything kind of takes care of itself. So that's always been my approach to things. I find it works across industries and journey types. And it really kind of sets the foundation right for being able to make that data actionable in other use cases.
Yeah, I love that, talking about sort of the customer journey. And understanding that and then focusing in, because it's sort of, you can't boil the whole ocean. It's if you can find the 5 to 7, to your point, moments that matter and focusing in there, you're going to, the Pareto principle, you're going to probably capture and benefit, 80%, of your efforts if you can just focus on, those points that matter in that customer journey or all of those customer touch points. I love that. So can you give an example of a call it a from to story with some of your clients or a client where, that client was using some of the best technology and how you moved them, to that to benefit their organization, et cetera. And so, how did you sort of approach that and maybe discuss some of the outcomes of that?
Sure. Yeah, you bet. Yeah, there are a number of examples. I'll kind of laser in on one because it really kind of tells the whole story. So we were brought in to help them think through a consumer strategy, not technology initially, but a consumer strategy of how do they think differently about their patients, the experience, how to, attract them and retain them over time. And that led to, multiple efforts at exploring their vision, their challenges, et cetera. We then developed a roadmap, and from that roadmap, we were able to kind of put them on a path of what kind of technologies were going to make sense. As it turned out along the way, and there's usually some speed bump, with most paths, the vendor that was chosen by the client really, frankly, lost its mooring and started failing, not just with this particular client, but with many. So we really had to kind of rethink, where do we want to go with this? And the beauty of it is there were some truisms about how technology works that, eventually the providers that have the smartest clients build the best product because those smart clients are informing them on where to go with their roadmap. So we were able to put a good path in place. And the beauty, from an outcome standpoint, is we kind of created the gold standard for how do you do this in healthcare. What is the, kind of core CRM platform? What is the core data that should be part of that platform? What are the operational processes? How do you measure success, et cetera? And we started with what was a fairly strong business case for the investment. Ended up there, they've exceeded that by 4 to 5x. So it's really been an enormous success story. I'm not going to name them for just kind of protecting the strategic nature of what we did there, but they have subsequently been speaking at conferences, and everybody's kind of calling them to say, well, how did you do that? What's it look like? What are the ways you get there? And, obviously feel some pride for helping them craft a journey and then, kind of pivot when they had a challenge with one provider and ultimately getting them in what I think is again, the gold standard for how to do this. And the results have been remarkable. Patient growth has been great. Their profit, per patient has been great. They've also improved what's called population health, or the ability to keep people healthy before they get into higher acuity situations. So it's just been a remarkable story, and it's been kind of neat to watch other health systems look to them to say, how might we do that as well?
What a great from to story. That's a really great example. But I think that leads maybe to another question, which is, how does, a health system or really any organization, how do you help them prioritize? Where do you even start? Now, you've talked a bit about, for example, 5 to 7 points on a customer journey, understanding the journey, et cetera. But can you talk a little bit more about how do you know when it's sort of, how do you know when you know that this is one of the most relevant points in a customer journey? Is it through trial and error? Is it through talking to end users, actual patients, et cetera? Is it through an iterative conversation with the client? How do you know where to start?
Yeah, typically we'll begin with internal interviews of leadership, and then as well as people kind of closer to the patient. And you begin to see some patterns emerge. And, frankly, we are able to see patterns across multiple clients given the type of work that we do. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we look at data. Invariably, you can find things in data where attrition is occurring, what other patterns might exist there. Ultimately, I would say that when we're doing road mapping work, we'll typically find anywhere between 15 and 50 to 100 good ideas of what could be done. From there, we typically will break them down into how beneficial is that idea, what business value, what patient interest would it, result in, and then how easy or challenging is that idea. And that's the axis we find, Glenn, that most people tend to ignore or choose to not focus on as much as they should, particularly like in healthcare where it's so resource constrained. And that allows us to really get a sense for where's the fastest ROI going to come from. I haven't talked about it yet today, but I've had the benefit of leading startups and have led multiple successful turnarounds. And I find that one of the most important things in a transformation is to get early momentum. It causes people to believe in what's possible. It causes other hand raisers to say, I'd be interested in doing that too. And ultimately kind of creates a sense of winning. And we find one of the greatest failure modes isn't identifying the opportunities, is going after that big idea in the upper left-hand corner that may be super beneficial, but is so darn difficult, it might take you 2 or 3 years to get done. And by that point, you've lost the momentum and probably lost funding for phases 2 and 3. So that's the method we've used over and over again. We find it to be invaluable. I think maybe the last thing I'll point out, given your question and the nature of it, is there's nothing that replaces the voice of the customer. And we find maybe more so in healthcare than anywhere that people are looking at data after the fact. And you obviously have some process science in your background with the comment about Pareto. I find that if you wait to capture data until the experience is complete, you've lost the opportunity to learn from it at scale and the opportunity to recover in real time. And so I'm a big believer in capturing more and more data in real time, using that to impact the actual journey that someone is going through. And as a consequence, you not only are learning more, but you're fixing faster and more iteratively. So that voice of the customer captured digitally, more in real time, is just a powerful driver for informing what's actually happening and then injecting that into your benefit and ease graph to decide which ones to attack.
Yeah. My mind, when you were describing that, it also goes to impact effort matrix.
Yeah, exactly.
To try to understand, because it's sort of like what you're saying is, I know I can have a major impact on this client here. I can do this, but the effort to do that, the cost, the resources, the time, et cetera, may just outweigh doing that. So maybe that the biggest and best idea that you have may actually not necessarily be the most practical. But to your point, so sometimes you might want to try to do something that has the biggest impact with the least amount of effort, because now you get that momentum going, to your point on transformation.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the exact point, is you'll eventually get that big idea done. In fact, maybe the big idea is actually 5 smaller ideas done one at a time. And I think that's crucial to figure out how to get momentum and get people believing that you're going to be successful.
Mm-hmm. And then how much of that do you feel, Rich, is the importance of breaking down the work? Because because there is so much that, particularly in a transformation situation, as you were mentioning, or a turnaround scenario, everything's on fire, where there's so many things that you have to address. I've been in that situation one time in my own career where it's like everywhere you turn, there's a fire. And so what's your advice for a marketing operations executive who is thrown into a situation? Maybe they just got hired into an organization. Maybe they're new in a startup situation where, my gosh, everywhere they turn, there's, an opportunity to improve. How do you prioritize and break down the work that's there to choose the things that are going to have the most impact, but the least amount of effort?
Yeah, it just, as you were talking, an interesting analogy came to mind, and I hope this is sufficiently appropriate for the audience, but if you can just kind of get this visual briefly. A lot of people think that Bruce Lee was maybe the best martial artist ever, and they always talk about the fact that he could fight 10 or 15 people at a time. He wasn't fighting 10 or 15 people at a time. He was fighting one person at a time, solving it quickly, and then moving to the next, and then the next, and then the next. And so my observation when people have this conflagration of things going on is the best thing you can do is focus and solve something, have one less spinning plate, and then solve another, and then solve another. Don't try to fix 15 things at once. Fix 1 or 2. Make everybody feel good about those wins, and then move on to the next one. And invariably, we find that when a situation is really complex like that, and it feels like There's so much happening. You got to break it down, pick off a couple of things, get some wins, and then keep going. And that kind of goes back to that benefit ease impact thing where you're, getting a few successes out of the way and using that to create momentum for the next thing. I think that same truism applies here.
That's a wonderful analogy of Bruce Lee. Just as a side note, growing up, I was involved in the martial arts. I was in Japanese Kenpo, and oh yeah, exactly. Yep. And then I actually earned my black belt in Taekwondo. So Bruce Lee that's always one of my favorite artists and stories. There's so many lessons there. So I love your analogy. That's very, very appropriate. Okay, let's talk a little bit now then more about the actual end patient, like in this case. Like I know that when we were chatting before, one of the things that I think you've really tried to focus on, and you've talked a bit about it, about the journey, of course, whether it's a customer journey, a patient journey. And I know that you said that it is so important for patients to be seen as people, not that they're just having things done to them, that there's, this healthcare, is just happening to them, but that they are being worked with, that this is a partnership, this is a collaboration, et cetera. So how have you sort of brought that concept to life with, all of your healthcare clients?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to put yourself in the shoes of the patient. The greatest physicians in the world have themselves been patients. And so they probably have experienced some of the things that I would present to them as principles that they need to reflect on. I think the second thing I would say is that healthcare historically narrowly focused on the clinical attributes of the individual. I've got a broken arm, I've got, AFib, whatever it might be, and narrowly thought about those things. Increasingly, though, health systems and care providers realize there are many more things that actually contribute to what was going on. And let me just give you one example of that. I had the opportunity to spend some time with one of the largest dialysis companies in the world. And they've got this program where they can extend the life of their patients by more than 2 years over the industry norm. It's predicated, though, on having a very successful 90-day onboarding program where they really indoctrinate the patient on the practices and how to follow healthy principles in that journey. And what we found was when we unpacked the data that the biggest determinant of that person not having a good 90-day onboarding program, as a consequence, not extending their life, was transportation. Had nothing to do with clinical issues. And so we always try to illustrate the fact that if you don't understand the whole person, you're going to suboptimize clinical outcomes. So in the healthcare world, there's a technology called the EMR, that basically the core system that operates clinical care, and it knows everything about the patient. But the reality is that human being coming in is a person, and they actually don't want to be a patient. They want to get back to their normal life. And so if you think about all of the things that happened in their journey before they had the symptom, you think about the decisions as they're transitioning into being a patient, acute clinical care, and then transitioning back into their life. If you think about that graphically, there's way more going on about them being a person than them actually being the patient when they actually have that procedure done. And we find that, that visually represents the fact that you need far more involved in that person's clinical journey than just clinical information and clinical support. And that's really what we've tried to provide is kind of the whole person view and thinking about all aspects of that individual, including, by the way, they needed the babysitter, or they've got young kids they're bringing with them while Billy's sick, or, things like that really drive home the experience for that individual, not just you fixed my broken arm. Once you're done teaching those components and people kind of put themselves in that frame, kind of the light bulbs go off and they realize, wow, I'm really missing a whole lot about what's going on with that individual. And now I'm in a better position, both how my mind is operating, but also the data I'm using to think about managing that journey. It really changes their perspective and creates an opportunity to create, kind of breakthrough experience management capabilities with them.
Well, and when you talk about breakthrough, one question that I think I would have is, so much of marketing and marketing operations is about creating connections throughout an organization to create those breakthrough connections, whether it be at a client or in a business strategy or a marketing strategy, what have you. And those connections across the organization are, with sales, with revenue ops, with technology, et cetera. And so, and I know that you have a tremendous background in technology. And so how do you sort of recommend when working with technology teams, think about it as, CIOs, chief information officers, et cetera. How do you get technology leadership excited about, what, the changes and the recommendations that you're bringing to bring real business change? How do you get them excited about that? And how does your experience in working with, technology teams, how has it helped you through this process?
Yeah, I'd say a few things. It's kind of a several step process, and they can all kind of happen simultaneously or in a sequence. But I think the first thing is to have empathy for their circumstance. Anyone that's been a CIO realizes how challenging of a job that is, and you're dealing with, sometimes hundreds of systems and multiple business issues, and your constituents don't often realize what those challenges are. So I try to walk in their shoes with them because I've been in that role several times. I think once you've got that level of collaborative trust in place that they realize you have their interest in mind, you've now got a framework or a platform from which you can collaborate. With that, then I start to think about with them the art of the possible and maybe share what some of their peers are doing so it's not this bleeding edge kind of thing. And frankly, in healthcare, there's a little bit of a pack mentality. People are trained to not go do something that others have not already done for, kind of risk management purposes on a clinical basis. That transcends over into how technologists and other executives operate in healthcare. So giving them a sense for what industry norms exist inside and outside of healthcare kind of gives them another new safe zone from which then you can say, now imagine if we could achieve this or that, or imagine, how much support you would engender within your peer group by providing this or that, and, et cetera. That is a really big part of getting them excited. Last but not least, I find that most people, when they approach these projects, they are extremely good at identifying all the complexity and don't think about how do you create more simplicity from it. So, for example, rather than implementing 53 point solutions like many marketers do, I'm a big believer in get the core right and implement fewer solutions, which, by the way, may have enterprise capabilities that help the CIO solve 15 or 20 other problems that they might be facing. That simplification and being a collaborator and advocate for the CIO's challenges really breaks down the barriers we find. So it's kind of a multi-step process, but I think that collaboration, seeing the art of the possible, having them see their peers, and creating a simple path forward are the success levers I've found. And generally, once we get that in place, we find that most CIOs want to do great stuff. They're just kind of facing this compendium of challenges. And when you break it down, ultimately they get on board, and it's a lot of fun at that point.
Mm-hmm. I think one common theme that we have certainly had on this podcast with so many guests is the complexity of technology. There are literally tens of thousands now of MarTech platforms that are out there. And to your point, many of them are point solutions. This does just that. And then there's the larger platforms that do 1,000 things. So I think your comments on simplification are quite salient, not only for the technology team, but for the marketing operations teams as well. Is there some tips that you can share about how do you know when you've sort of chosen the right technology, along the way? How do you sort of know that, you've made the right call? Is it just trial and error? What's been your experience?
Yeah, well, at least in healthcare, and I would say this transcends non-healthcare, but I'll use healthcare as the frame for a moment here. Invariably, we find that people think about a narrow point in the journey and say, I need to fix scheduling. I need to fix decisioning. I need to fix search. I need to, whatever it might be. They buy a thing for that. What they forget is the big picture here is the patient journey is longitudinal. And if I'm fracturing the experience, I'm probably fracturing the data. Now I've lost the ability to think about what's happening for that patient as they move through the journey. And as a consequence, in my opinion, one of the biggest decisions of it, does that technology fit well in my ecosystem is its data going to fit in my patient 360 or whatever it is that helps me understand that journey and manage that journey. If not, and if it's only going to be a point solution and a point database, I've by definition broken my end goal, which is a unified experience and a 360 understanding of that person. So to me, that's kind of job number one. And the corollary to that is, does that platform have clean integration, or is it impossible to get data out of it in a way that's actionable for other things downstream? And one of the analogies I use to describe that to clinicians or marketers is, I call up my primary care physician. Why are you going to come in? I got a sore throat. I show up. Why are you here? I got a sore throat. I'm back getting weighed. Why are you here? I got a sore throat. Talk to the nurse in the room. Why are you here? I got a sore throat. If that data was transcending with me and I had a little plaque on my shirt that said, I'm here because I have a sore throat, a lot of things have been simplified. And that's the principle that I really try to put in place as kind of job one in making sure the entire marketing ecosystem is going to be actionable. I find that once you've got that right, then you can solve other things through roadmaps and technology architectures, et cetera. But that's really the biggest key that, in my opinion, creates the underpinning for everything else you want to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Well, your patient example there about I have a sore throat, that's an interesting one because it's also back to the journey component. What are they trying to achieve?
Yeah.
I have a sore throat. I'm trying to get my sore throat addressed. Every customer in, even in non-healthcare settings, every customer is trying to achieve, they're trying to accomplish something. And the better you can understand that, the quicker you can understand that, the more effective you'll be as a marketer. So are there some other examples like that, Rich, that where you've gained learnings from healthcare that you've been able to apply to other or that you could apply to other industries, other learnings such as that one?
Well, I think you touched on it, but I'll maybe amplify a little bit. I had a chance to work in support of a company that did a lot of research. And one of the leaders in that group uses a term called listening posts. And it's the idea of, as much as possible, be aware of and have ears around things that matter, kind of put antennas out there to help you capture. And so I think the biggest truism in healthcare, because healthcare is so personal, is what is that individual going through? What is their goal? And, to your point, I find when I call into a contact center for some, whatever the reason might be, if they ask me 5 questions before I get to the point of saying, why am I calling? What do I care about? I'm really getting super frustrated. And so as quickly and as often as possible, I'd say, really understand what that person's goals are and then orient to the process or, the function around them. There's nowhere more true for that issue than in healthcare, but I think that, clearly is a truism that would work elsewhere. I think the other thing I would say is in healthcare, the power of referral is enormous, whether it's your physician or frankly your neighbor. If you're going to go get your car worked on, you kind of care about, is that going to be done right? If you're going to go get your arm worked on, or better yet, your heart, you really care, is that going to get done right? And you really want to have trusted sources. So the power of the customer as your marketer is probably no more true than anywhere compared to healthcare. And so I think if you take that as part of your business model, what am I going to do to turn my customers into marketers for me? You can solve a lot of problems, and I think that transcends multiple industries. And, frankly, that was taught to me when I was running one of the largest loyalty services company in the country, of understanding the power of referral from their existing customer base and how to use that as part of your toolkit. Kind of the proverbial Oh gosh, I just lost the term that's used for customer referral, but NPS, I guess. But basically, the
Sure.
idea of, is it likely that your customer is going to say good things about you or not? And I think if you can get that right, generally everything else is probably going well as well.
Yeah, well, in that the customer satisfaction that they would be able to generate testimonials, I think it goes back to your comments about understanding those 5 to 7 points that matter in a
Exactly.
journey. Because if you know what those 5 to 7 points are, then in each of those points, how can you actually have customer feedback providing direct information to your future patient, future customer, et cetera, at those points that matter? Is that, commenting on social media? Is this, testimonials or quotes on the website? Is this a customer referral programs and having a customer talk to another customer or a prospect in a sales engagement in B2B? So that, I think your comments about leveraging word of mouth, testimonials, having customers become, your promotion is just really, really, important to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, and to your point, the whole idea of capturing data along the way, those points, what I call the signature moments of truth. IBM has asked me to write a book on process science and use that for chief operating officers as a way to transform their business. And that was really one of the key principles, is to break it down into the 5 or 7 things that matter. But once you've done that, you can really inject a lot of capability into those few areas and really kind of massively impact the points that matter. And I find that so many people are overcome by the daunting nature of, wow, there's so much going on. But if you focus in the few things that matter, you can really apply some effort, resources, tech, whatever it might be, and make a pretty big difference and learn from what's working and then iteratively improve. So it's really just kind of a powerful paradigm to approach it that way.
Well, these the signature moments of truth that you reference. One of the things that comes to mind that we hear a lot is the challenge that marketing operations executives have in balancing, in creating an integrated marketing strategy, something that integrates both physical marketing as well as digital marketing. So, how do you work with your clients on this balance between, on the physical marketing side, things like promotional items, signage, or a direct mail, or a brochure, a folder, wayfinding signage, all of this, because these are touch points for customers. And how does that sort of add value and blend with the digital experiences to create sort of this comprehensive marketing strategy for patients, for customers, et cetera? What's been your experience?
Yeah, I'd say a few things. First of all, I think you have to really have a good feel for your audience and the journey they're going through, and be very clear about what matters to them as they're going through that journey. And as a consequence, knowing where they show up, you want to be present in those places, kind of the classic marketing thing. The second thing I would say is I had the benefit of being an executive, in fact, the president of a business that operated both incentive programs, but also experiential rewards as part of that loyalty thing that I was mentioning earlier. And what experiences do is they galvanize what the brand is providing to them, both favorably and unfavorably. And so a lot of the physical touch points you talked about are part of that experience. And so, whether it's mementos or something tangible along the way, it creates, kind of a durable memory of to what happened then. Was it favorable or unfavorable? And really, it's kind of emblazoned on the retina. Let me just give you one example. One of the businesses I was in, they had this reward program. And as a consequence of that, I earned some golf clubs. And I was, pretty active golfer at the time. I've had those golf clubs now with me for, more years than I care to admit. But every time I look at them, I'm reminded of, well, that was really a cool thing that happened back then. I'm really appreciative of that. And it takes me back to a positive brand experience. And this is now 30 years later. So I think the point would be it has such durability to it and kind of carries forward over time and is real that it creates a contextual awareness and durability that is more than just a quick glimpse, as you're moving through social or whatever other digital platform through which you're engaging. So that would be the biggest difference for me, is just the durability that has been borne out time and time again with researching how is a brand memorable for an individual. And so that's probably my thought on that.
Yeah, well, in also digital sometimes can be very ephemeral. It can be very short-lived. It can be very, very quick. And so to your point, a physical manifestation of a brand, a promotional item that you get from a trade show, something like in your case, the golf clubs. Every time you see that, you're now enacting more senses. You're touching it, you're seeing it, maybe you're hearing it. And so it starts to generate something that has a much longer life. And more memorable, and can evoke more of those memories and bring back up those positive experiences and touch points with a brand, to your very point.
Exactly.
So that's excellent. So, Rich, before we wrap up today's episode, what would you say is the main takeaway that you want to share to help understand the challenges facing marketing operations executives today?
Yeah, I think to me, it's fighting through the complexity by picking a few priorities, getting momentum from them, simplifying the architecture, and realizing that the foundation is data that you can manage longitudinally. I find that people get so caught up in point that they compound their problem, not simplify their problem. And I think if you break it down into those things, becomes a whole lot more manageable. And so we're seeing that trend right now that obviously we're helping champion, but it really, in my mind, focus creates so much power, and marketers recognize the power of focus, just inherently by, their product stories. But that would be the biggie, is simplify the architecture, focus on some wins, and then think about, longitudinal capability rather than point.
I love the power of focus. That's a great line. I love that. The power of focus. That's excellent. Well, that wraps up this episode of The Art of Marketing Operations. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rich.
Thank you very much, Glenn. It's been a pleasure.
Well, until next time, stay safe and take care.
Thank you for listening to The Art of Marketing Operations, brought to you by Taylor. Don't forget to hit subscribe in your favorite podcast player. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and share. Until next time.